I am Florence Reed. You can call me Flo. More importantly, probably, this is Joaquin. And although Joaquin doesn't have a lot of education or money or political influence, I think it's Joaquin and farmers like him who are going to lead the way to a stable climate. Um, Farming and the food industry are responsible for about half of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And they also, especially the small farmers in economically disadvantaged countries, hold the promise to stabilize the climate. Of course, there will be a cost, but it will be a fraction of current farming subsidies that will get us more and better food, as well as our best chance at stabilizing the climate. Before I get into that, though, first I have to start with a confession. Well, three, actually. I have three potential conflicts of interest. One is on the website with my speaker profile. That's a small one. But the big ones of much more consequence are first, my son, because I will do absolutely anything in my power to make sure that he inherits a planet that will continue to sustain human civilization. And I'm really worried about that. The UN's IPCC report that just came out, they were saying that 2-degree increase was going to be problematic. Now they're saying 1.5 degrees. And these are 91 of the world's top climate change experts from 40 countries. They reviewed 6,000 studies on climate change. And they told us that we're heading in a really, really scary direction. Where 2 degrees, we're going to lose 99% of our coral reefs. 1.5 degrees, it'll only be 90%, right? Not to mention all the people who will be displaced, the conflict that will engender. Sorry to be a downer, but this is what motivates me and why I feel like we have to do everything we can to address this issue. And maybe all those experts are wrong, but I'm not willing to risk that if my son's future depends on it. And my last disclosure is that I'm half Swiss and I need my chocolate. So, so that's my other motivating factor. So smallholder farms, the ones that cover just a few acres and grow 70% of the world's food and 90% of its cacao for chocolate, they're the reason that I get up and get to work every morning. And I've dedicated my life to supporting those smallholder farmers. After finishing my Peace Corps service 25 years ago, I founded Sustainable Harvest International because I wanted to save the rainforest by offering more productive alternatives to slash and burn farming to the smallholder farmers who are struggling to get by. Farmers like Demetrio here, who lives in Membrillo, Panama. Growing up, he'd seen his family do slash and burn farming and not produce enough to eat well every day. And, honestly, the smallholder farmers Sustainable Harvest works with, their top concern is not energy, it's not even money. Their top concerns are food and water. That's the first priority. The rest would be nice, but the first priorities are food and water. And using slash and burn farming, his family was not only clearing more of the forest every year, they also weren't earning enough money to send Demetrio to school, even beyond the 6th grade. So I continue to support farmers like Demetrio because I think they offer our best hope to stabilize the climate and keep this planet livable for my son and the children who will follow him. So, why do I think that these farmers are so important? First off, Our current agriculture and food systems are responsible for about 50% of all greenhouse gas emissions. This is true of slash and burn farming, but also of all the farms that use agrochemicals and lots of mechanization. Um, and so when Demetrio became a father, he wanted to give more to his children than he had had growing up. And he knew slash and burn farming wouldn't provide that. He hoped that maybe conventional farming would. So he went to work on a conventional rice plantation where his coworkers got sick and died. His best friend died from the exposure to agrochemicals, which also we now know happened to be heating up the climate. So for Demetrio, it really hardly seemed like it was worth the $6 a day that he earned working on that plantation. But he didn't see any better alternative for a long time. And although I believe we do need to drastically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from all sources, including farming, and I believe what the IPCC says that we can do that in time in the next 22 years. I think there's something more important for us to do first. And if we really want a shot at stabilizing the climate, this is where our focus needs to be. Because even if we stop 100% of greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow, the climate's going to keep heating up because of what we've already put into the atmosphere. So while I believe that we also need to plug the leak of greenhouse gas emissions into our atmosphere, I think that our first priority needs to be to start bailing a whole lot of carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it back into the soil, what's commonly referred to as carbon drawdown. So that's why Sustainable Harvest International has partnered with Regeneration International and also signed on to the 4 per 1,000 initiative, which was launched by the French government, signed on to by over 40 nations and hundreds of NGOs such as Sustainable Harvest International. That's a way that I think we can buy ourselves the time to do all the research and development and all of the other good work that's been talked about already. And there's a lot of reasons why experts believe that it's possible to meet this 4 per 1,000 goal, which would keep us to the 2-degree goal as well. And they would do it by sequestering 6 to 10 billion tons of carbon per year through these regenerative agroecology practices. And one reason that the experts believe we can do this is because the Earth's 22 billion acres of farmland, pasture, and forest, even in their currently degraded state, having lost up to 75% of their carbon in some cases, they're already sequestering a net 1.5 billion tons of carbon annually. Another reason is because millions of farmers are already practicing what we now call regenerative agriculture that goes beyond sustainability and actually regenerates the land and the climate by sequestering far more than the 0.4% of additional soil carbon every year that's being talked about in the 4 per 1,000 initiative. In fact, some farms report sequestering as much as 600 times that amount. And then the reason why I think we can reach this goal is because I've spent a lot of time talking with the 3,000 smallholder farmers who have partnered with Sustainable Harvest International over the last 21 years to transition to these types of regenerative farming practices. And while I know that larger farms and ranches have an important role to play as well, I think it's the smallholders who can best lead the way. So why don't I think we should focus on the big farms? Although only 1% of the world's 570 million farms are over 50 hectares, 125 acres, they control 65% of the 12 billion acres being farmed in the world. So it sounds like that should be our big prize, right? Well, maybe eventually. But I think that there's some lower hanging fruit and that we should pick that first. When I talk about regenerative agriculture, I'm talking about a particular kind of organic agriculture that focuses on the maximization of soil health, carbon sequestration, and biodiversity. I would say that organic is the starting point, but there's a lot more to it than that. And it's not easy for a big farm to make that transition from conventional to organic practices. From an economic point of view, organic farming has been growing by 20 to 24% annually since 1990, much faster than most sectors of agriculture. And it allows farmers to make up to 3 times the profit margin of conventional farming practices. But large-scale farms run up against many obstacles to going organic. Conversion to certified organic production from a conventional system requires a 3-year transition period. And during the transition period, growers may experience reduced yields while they wait for the soil health to build up and get the yields back to at or near the previous production. And at the same time, there's also high managerial and labor costs, lack of marketing and infrastructure for certified organic products, the burden of additional paperwork, and also a steep learning curve. So imagine risking a $500 million investment in a conventional farm to try to make that transition to this organic regenerative agriculture. It's understandable why usually it's not an easy sell to the large-scale conventional farms. Most of the smallholder farmers, on the other hand, are eager to make this transition with limited risks and big potential gains. They may also have a steep learning curve in making that transition, but the other obstacles are much less of a factor for them, and the potential benefits are much greater. These farms have very limited managerial costs, no matter what agricultural practices they're using, especially since most of the work is usually done by the family. And what labor costs there are tend to be low in the countries where most smallholder farmers are found. Countries like Panama, where the minimum wage for farm workers is $1.22 an hour. And for most of the world's smallholder farmers, hunger is a bigger issue than markets or profit margins. So a diversified farm that produces a healthy diet for the family, plus a little extra to sell, represents a significantly improved standard of living, regardless of whether the production is certified organic with the accompanying higher price or not. Hunger was going down. Now it's going back up. It's getting close to a billion people going hungry again. And this is in part because of climate change, in part because of conflict, and in part because the chemicals that were used to boost production for a while have been depleting the soil all that time and aren't having the same effect that they used to. And I think it's just a scandal that half of the world's hungry are themselves farmers. They should be able to produce plenty to feed themselves well. And that gives us a tremendous opportunity, I think, to help them grow plenty of food for themselves and others in a way that will, at the same time, stabilize the climate. And since 1997, Sustainable Harvest International has been helping farmers shift to more productive farming systems that preserve tropical forests in their communities. And then by 2007, we had also decided to promote 100% regenerative organic practices. And it was a year after we made that commitment to organic practices that Dimitrio's family here joined our program to see if they could make a better life for themselves by establishing a regenerative organic farm. So Dimitrio left that plantation, and our field trainer visited the family every week or two to share knowledge that would allow Dimitrio's family to grow an abundance of crops without burning any more forest, without using any more chemicals. And after 5 years, Dimitrio's farm went from looking like this when he joined our program to looking like that when he graduated from our program. And now he feels confident that he can continue on his own and feed his family well, have enough income, and also share what he's learned with other farmers. By the time he got to that point, Demetrio was comfortable using compost, cover crops, and mulch to regenerate healthy, productive soils. That he was sequestering carbon in the soil was just an added bonus for all of us. And each year that he drew down more carbon out of the atmosphere into the soil, he also increased the productivity of his farm. His farm that's been transformed into an agro ecosystem of fruit and hardwood and spice trees growing together with coffee and sugar cane around rice paddies that are weeded and fertilized by fish. More fruits and vegetables are growing on another hillside. And his farm's ecosystem now takes care of itself to a great extent with goats, butterflies, birds, soil microbes, worms, all doing their part and coming back to the land to make it productive for our planet and for Demetrio's family. So now Demetrio's family produces enough for a healthy diet and also income to meet their other basic needs. And since he can grow on the same land year after year, he doesn't burn any more of the forest. And now, of course, that might not mean a lot if it's just the 4 acres that Demetrio farms. But Demetrio is one of 3,000 Sustainable Harvest International farmers who've transformed 25,000 acres of degraded land to regenerative organic farms, stabilizing the climate, sharing what they've learned with other farmers, and also planting 4 million trees back onto that deforested land over the last 20 years. So this has meant the world to those 3,000 families. But admittedly, it's just a drop in the bucket when it comes to stabilizing the Earth's climate. And that's motivated Sustainable Harvest International to shift our focus. So my greatest hope is that this drop in the bucket, along with others, can ripple across the globe to create the level of change that we need. It's easy to see why so many smallholder farmers like Demetrio are anxious to make this transition to farming practices that will dramatically improve their lives, as well as stabilizing the climate. For our part, Sustainable Harvest International has set a scaling up vision to help 1 million farms transition to regenerative organic practices by 2030, in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We'll work with some farmers directly, and we'll train other organizations, such as government agencies, to use our methodology to reach even more farmers. So that's how we plan to help lead the way to a paradigm shift for the 500 million small-scale farms that produce most of the world's food with almost no resources right now. If we help those 500 million farms become regenerative, like Demetrio's farm, they'll draw down 6 billion tons of carbon out of the atmosphere into the soil every year. That's the equivalent of shutting down every coal-fired plant on Earth every year. And it also happens to be the lower end of the goal for the 4 per thousand initiative. And this is just the small farms that we're talking about. And those 500 million farmers are ready to do their part, but they can only do it with some support to get them started. Now, I imagine you're wondering, we've talked a lot about money today, and that's certainly, obviously, a factor. Personally, it's not the top factor in my mind. I know these farmers, my son, they can't eat money, they can't drink money, they can't breathe money. It's a useful tool, but I have bigger concerns for our future. That said, we do need to think about the cost. And I have been thinking about that. And it currently costs Sustainable Harvest International $6,500 to support a farmer through our 5-year training program. which seems pretty cheap if you figure it's sort of the equivalent of a college degree. But you multiply that by 500 million smallholder farms, and it does add up to a pretty hefty price tag. So even though we've already stretched every penny to do as much as possible, now we're thinking about how can we get even more efficient and take a fresh look at how to significantly lower the cost for achieving at least our core desired outcomes, such as drawing carbon down out of the atmosphere and putting it back into the degraded lands. So as we move towards our scaling up goal, it's my hope that we can better entice others to adopt our methodology by cutting the net cost to $250 per farm per year for 3 years. At this price point, it would cost around $30 billion per year for 12 years to help all 500 million smallholder farms transition to regenerative organic farming. Now, you may think that $30 billion per year should sound like a lot to a woman who's here struggling to meet her organization's budget of $1.5 million. And yeah, 30 billion does sound like a lot to me, but I think that's about US direct subsidies to the fossil fuel industry, which makes it seem not quite so big. And I also know that governments of the world provide $600 billion a year or more in subsidies to industrial agriculture, GMOs, globalized exports, factory farms, and agrochemicals, all of which are collectively responsible for about half of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So if we're talking about redirecting 5% of current government subsidies away from degenerative farming practices and instead putting it towards regenerative farming practices, $30 billion doesn't sound like very much to me anymore. So what will be the future of the world's children? All of us on this planet will decide whether it will be a degenerated future or a regenerated future. Right now, our food system is speeding humanity towards a cliff, but we have more than enough resources to follow the lead of farmers like Demetrio down a different path. If we act fast, we still have time. Those 500 million farmers are ready to do their part, but they can only do it if we do our part and support farmers like Demetrio. I hope you'll join us in regenerating the earth through smallholder farms. Thank you.